Thank you.
Yes, so we have an awesome guest today. We have Tanmeet Sethi here with us today. So I will have her introduce herself so that we can all get to know who she is and what she does and her story.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah.
I'm Tanmeet Sethi, and I'm an integrative and psychedelic physician and been in practice for 27 years. And also an author of a new book last year called Joy is My Justice, Reclaim Yours Now, and a national speaker and TEDx speaker. And all my work has the intersection of joy, well being, mental health, and really working on how to resource joy within ourselves without the toxic
Mhm.
positivity and the toxic wellness conversation that is so present in our society.
Yes, and that's very, very needed in that world and in that industry because so often we lean in the opposite direction of that spectrum where it does become toxic or out of this sense of not enoughness. So learning and teaching on how to do that in a way that feels embodied and authentic
Hmm.
is wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So I'm very curious, what does it mean to be a psychedelic physician? What does joy look like for you? How did you get on this journey? I want to know all the things.
Wow, those are a lot of questions.
Yes.
Well, let's start with the psychedelic piece. I am by training a family medicine physician and was a family medicine integrative doc for 25 years and doing primary
Mhm,
care, hospital care, delivering babies, all the things.
mm,
And then 4 years ago, I got extra training in psychedelic medicine, and I've been doing global trauma work for 20 years. And so it really was a culmination of all my work in complex mental health and trauma, and really feels full circle for me, honestly, because it feels like a way to approach mental health in a way that is really about inner consciousness and healing versus externalized, medicalized approaches. It doesn't mean it's a all cure all for everyone, but what it does
no,
mean is it's a way to offer another tool that allows us to access basically a rewriting of our narrative and really trying to find a way to heal within ourselves. So that's been really exciting, new addition to my practice. And
mhm.
then I don't remember the other questions.
Well, I'll come back to my other questions. I have them. I'm very curious around that shift within you, going from that external to the internal and going from the more practical, westernized medicine lens and holding to more of a, shall we call it progressive, even though none of this is new medicine approach to healing and having it be more embodied and client driven.
Yeah. Well, that was always my approach, even in medical school, and how I knew I wanted to practice, but there wasn't really nomenclature around it or even good mentorship around it. And so I went to medical school and felt excited about learning all the science and all the real life clinical experience. But I was really thirsting for a different way to practice that included that, but also melded with what I knew to be true, which was that our bodies want to arc towards the path of healing, and that there are
Mhm.
internal wisdom and also ancient ancestral wisdom approaches and lineages that we can access. And so I did that through my integrative medicine training at first and my global trauma work, really working on how to shift people, not only with conventional treatments that we may have at our disposal, but also with plants and botanicals and mind body medicine and nutrition and harnessing the power of our own biochemistry, all of that together. And psychedelics became another tool for that as well. So that all really came from my upbringing because in our home, we really had more of a Ayurvedic approach, which is Eastern Indian traditional medicine, and really didn't use Western medicine that often. And
Mhm.
so it's funny that I became a doctor,
Yeah.
but there are no doctors in my family, extended or otherwise. So it was my own idea from somewhere. But we really relied on the power of food as medicine and
Mhm.
healing approaches that were outside of what you might call the mainstream box. And
Mhm.
so it feels right that that's how I practice, but it took a little work to figure out how to do that within the confines of a very rigid system. So, yeah, I think that is a good nutshell.
Yeah, yeah, and it really is that story of bringing 2 worlds together and walking in 2 worlds, and even cultural perspective, is it sounds like even unique to your family,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
even within that medicinal approach, like recipes and ingredients and region, and, like, that is so specific, I imagine. Like, how do you hold that? How have you held that?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just maintaining curiosity and reverence. So,
Mm,
I always have curiosity for what ways we can approach any kind of condition, and with the best science evidence we have, as well as the best evidence handed down orally or through recipes or what have you. And I also have reverence. I have reverence for the science I've been taught that is really critical, but I also have reverence for ancient wisdom and for ancestral wisdom that holds as much importance to me. And so I think when we maintain curiosity and reverence along with a desire to provide the best quality care that I can, it really combines to be a way to hold all of that very easily. It doesn't feel like a hard thing, it feels like the only thing.
yeah, I love that. I mean, it really does take a lot of openness to even explore a different modality of medicine or treatment. And leading with curiosity, I think, can open up so many doors versus the structure that we're handed through westernized medicine of this is the treatment and this is the structure, and the client must fit within those confines versus like, well, we actually have all of these options and tools at our own exposure, and like, let's see what fits for them and their needs. And I think that's wonderful because it is such a whole bodied approach.
Mhm.
And my own personal opinion is when we're approaching health and wellness from a whole bodied approach, then it's sustainable and it's maintainable because it's based on what works for that individual, not what works for the system, maybe.
Yes, I think you're completely right. And it's also why I think that equity is so important in how we approach that conversation, and why I'm so
Mhm.
passionate about especially the mental health conversation, because what we tend to do is have conversations about what hack would bring someone to happiness and what
Yeah.
tool anyone could use, when we don't take into effect that, we really can't thank ourselves out of poverty. We really can't manifest a cure or a better job when we are stricken with socioeconomic ailments that most people in the privileged class are not. So, when you really
Mhm.
look at these conversations we're having, they're not for everyone, and they're very much leaving most people out.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely. Right? It's that dissonance between where we are versus where we want to be, and that equity builds access, and we, don't always have that. In fact, most of the world does not have that. And so this is a very privileged place and space to be in, especially when we're talking about mental health and physical health. Um, I'm curious, kind of what your story is within that. Um, Even that idea of joy, like
Mhm.
how has that been integrated into the work that you do? Um,
Yeah.
Keeping all of this other heavier stuff in mind.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. I think that's the crux of why I've been always so passionate about this, but what has amplified that to make it feel like a life purpose.
Mhm.
So I myself, I think, gave in to those hacks and those ways of thinking that I should feel better, and I feel bad if I can't feel better.
Mhm.
That now I feel even worse because I can't get better.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until over my childhood and young adulthood, I managed depression in and out, and also a lot of alienation from cultural alienation and racism and so forth. But
Mhm.
It wasn't until I had a very big tragedy in my own life that felt that it became very granular and very crucial that I figured out immediately. Uh,
Mm,
as it immediately made years, but like that
yeah,
became my purpose. So
yeah.
when I was 9 months pregnant with my third child, I learned that my second child, who was barely 3 years old at the time, had a degenerative and fatal neuromuscular condition. And
Mm,
so it was in that lightning strike moment, that before and after moment, that I really felt like I could not be happy again. There was no way that this would
mhm.
be solvable, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And, I thought it would never happen, and I was wrong, and I was right. And let me just explain. I was wrong because I am sitting here before you today, and I can tell you that my life is perfect, and not
Mm,
because of my son. I'm sorry, not despite my son, but because of him.
mm,
But I'm not that happy. And what I learned is that joy and happiness are very different things. I had them
yeah.
very confused. And
Mhm,
so I thought they were the same. And in my defense, we interchange them often. We
mhm,
talk about them as one thing,
mhm,
and they're really not. Happiness is a cognitive evaluation, it's a way of understanding a binary of whether you're happy or not in any moment. It's not, I'll take any happiness I can get. But
yeah.
it isn't it's based on outcome. It's not like joy. Joy
Mm,
actually flows in our body in the same deep well as our pain. It's that same well that is what comes meaning and love and connection. All
mm,
those things also cause us very deep pain.
mm,
And it is actually in opening to our pain that we open more fully to our joy. And
mm,
I can say honestly that I am more joyous and joy filled than ever have been in my life, but I am not as happy as I was before that moment. There are many moments of my day that are not happy. And so
mhm,
it's a difference though. And I think that joy is an internal resource that is just a way we can nourish ourselves in a way that isn't about toxic positivity and looking at the bright side. The more open to my pain and don't deny it, the more I open to that river of joy. And we can talk about that in more detail, but in a nutshell, it really is a confused area for most of us because the wellness conversation is so confused.
yeah.
And so, it became really apparent to me that people really didn't understand the difference and understand that there are different ways we can look at, for instance, some of the tools that we are given, like gratitude or self compassion. They are beautiful tools, but they're offered to us in a very contrived, toxic way at times. And when we actually look at those tools, and many more in the frame of equity, justice, and joy, and also how we can live our full life with those tools, then we understand how powerful they are. And then we
Mhm,
walk into a different framework of power and self
mhm,
awareness. So that's really what happened for me and why I
mm.
wrote my book and why I work so deeply with patients on this, because I feel like everyone deserves joy, that it's a human right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even as you're talking about it, I'm like, I don't think I've ever differentiated happiness with joy. And it makes sense as you describe that entwinement between pain and joy and that deeper sense of connection and satisfaction. And then the happiness piece, like what a difference and what a unique perspective. Um, and I think it rings true because when things don't go your way or don't go as planned, like how you see things or how you internalize things is a choice. And yeah, thinking through my day of like, there's so many moments where I'm not happy, right? Like,
Mhm.
even as we began this recording, like things aren't working in the way that I thought. And so finding that deeper connection to the bigger meaning, I can see what you're saying, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think the feeling is like hope. It gives hope. of things don't always have to be happy, but that doesn't negate that things can be joyful.
Right. And
Yeah.
it actually gives us, like I said, power back. So, the truth is that every instance of oppression, trauma, or loss, every piece of suffering
Mm,
works and gains power because they strip us of our humanity, our
mm,
capacity to feel, our capacity to feel joy, our capacity to feel hope, like you said. And
mhm,
when we restore those with tools and different practices and different ways of being in our world, we restore our humanity. We gain back the power that was stripped from us. And it's why it feels so critical to me to have that discussion, because most of our world is oppressed either in terms of race, body, gender equity, or voice, and most people are feeling powerless. And
oh, yes.
when we can restore that power back in our body, we can actually have more capacity if we choose to work for power in the world as well. So we
Mhm,
we often think that, joy is about getting to the destination and winning the fight. And I would say we can't even fight the fight without joy. And
mhm,
so, if we're only wallowing and suffering in our burden, which is what the powers that be want, then we cannot win anything. And so
mm,
I would love for listeners to think about joy as a resource along the way, a joy as a resource either in activism and justice, but also as a resource along the way for your own healing, for your
mm,
own fight, right? That fight to find yourself again. Don't think joy is the end of that fight. Joy is actually integral to the fight.
yes. Yes. I love that. I love that so much because it is. I mean, my job as a therapist, often I sit with people who are feeling powerless and out of control and helpless. And um, I mean, yeah, the themes of oppression and inequality and all of it so present. Um, and so often, what that trauma does to the brain is it's so hard to find any glimmer, any glimpse of positivity or happiness or joy or connection or belonging, or support on any level, whether it's internalized or externalized. And so I think shifting the conversation to what would it look like if you had access to your internal joy during that healing? Like, joy is not the place to um, find, but it already exists, and it exists beside your pain. Which I mean, maybe it's just my field, but people are very close with pain. They have close relationship with pain, and they know the ins and outs, and they know how it functions, and it know how it impacts them and affects them, and affects their ability to hold relationship or how they see the world. And so, but in that, there's that sense of being alone, loneliness, not being seen, not being heard. So it's almost, I'm kind of seeing it as like, what if you had that joyful friend, right? Air quotes, to be alongside you and all of that. Well, then you would feel much more hopeful,
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
wouldn't be alone. You'd have company, if you
Yeah.
will. Like,
Yeah, and that's where it's exactly we're on the same page. I feel like that's where
mm,
I start to get granular with people
yeah,
and ask them, joy can feel really overwhelming. It can feel
yeah,
too big, right?
yeah.
And then I try to explain this framework of understanding that, for instance, in my example, when I got that diagnosis, and
Mhm.
we'll never forget that day, right? You never forget it.
Yeah, I bet.
And what I didn't realize at the moment, which I then began to realize, is that in that moment, I lost my sense of feeling safe in my body. I had
Mm,
been betrayed. I had been given this tragedy that wasn't fair. It wasn't right. How could this happen? I mean, all those
mhm.
are reasonable questions, but
Yes.
they're ways to explain the alienation we feel from ourselves and the world. So, in
Mhm,
that moment of people find it easier to understand when people are under physical safety duress, that they're not safe, they don't feel like they belong here, or, maybe there's discrimination happening, et cetera.
Mhm.
But I would ask people to widen that lens and also understand that when you have a big loss, a divorce, a death, a, diagnosis, whatever it may be, that in that moment you have lost a sense of safety and belonging. And
Mhm.
if instead of saying, how can I feel better? I really don't think that's a good way to go at it because it's very hard to feel better. But what if it's not about finding joy or better right now? It's about finding a moment of safety or belonging. And
Mhm.
then if we go to that, then what we realize is there's proven science in biochemistry and neurochemistry that, for instance, when we practice gratitude, the same areas of the brain light up as if someone is holding our hand during a painful procedure.
Mhm.
That actually gratitude is not about dismissing the pain and thanking for whatever you want to except for the pain. It's about finding the good that sits next to the pain. It's about widening the lens and reclaiming your power to see more.
Yeah.
And when people understand even that small example, then they start to understand, okay, this is not about some toxic hack or a way for me to act like it's better. It's a way for me to find a way to navigate this world in even if it doesn't feel totally safe or good to me right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was I had a mentor who taught me because I do a lot of work with the EMDR.
Hmm.
And she said, the brain doesn't know the difference between what's really happening versus like what you're imagining is happening, right? When we think about even complex PTSD, that's how the brain is functioning, right? In the gaps of what is real and what has happened, or what could have happened. And so she said, when we do guided imagery and we can strengthen that imagery, we're controlling chemicals that are dumping in the brain. Our body feels as though that thing is really happening. And so a lot of the work that I'll do with clients is through meditation or guided imagery, because it's like, what would have happened in that scenario had you had that protector alongside you or had that helper? What if a nurturer
Hmm.
did tuck you into bed and hold your hand and let you watch that movie or turn on the music for you and you weren't alone? And you'll watch people's body just soften and calm, and it becomes so real, right? And then they have that space within them that they can take whenever and wherever and use it, and that sense of empowerment of like, oh, I can have power and control over how I'm feeling, not only just in my brain and what I'm thinking, but how I feel in my nervous system, in my body.
Hmm.
And it's incredible. So I definitely understand and like support what you're saying around that practice of gratitude. It's not like, I'm so grateful that I have food on my plate. It's like I can be grateful that like my body is nourished, or I get to sit with a friend during this meal, or my belly stops grumbling and I get to take care of my belly. Like, um, yeah, just that reality of, it doesn't have to be perfect, but with practice, you're rewiring your brain and you're rewiring your nervous system, which then is a building foundation for a bigger, different life, if you will. And not even life, but mindset within that life, maybe, should I say. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you're bringing up the nervous system because that really is the heart of it. So even with something like self-compassion, people will think that self-compassion is about just take it easy on yourself, be gentle with yourself. Like it's like almost being too people think soft on themselves. First of all, I don't believe in soft and hard. I don't believe in those kinds of terminologies for it. But even if that's what you thought, I think we're really not giving self-compassion justice because actually it's a very, very potent vagus nerve stimulator, which is the main nerve of our nervous system. And it allows us to give our bodies a message of safety. You're okay. You can stand down right now. That is
Mhm.
a major power to have
Mhm.
for yourself, you know? And people think of self compassion as this soft woo woo, whatever they call it. And I would say it's a secret superpower, you know? And when you know what it does to your brain and your body and your nervous system, you realize that you can wield that power anytime.
Mhm.
And, you know, these are the kinds of things that people don't understand when we have conversations that are limited, that don't really look at how these tools work, how they work in the nervous system, how they actually restore power back. I think we just need to have a broader conversation, and then we can include more people and have more, as people say, buy-in. Because I think people don't. I would too. I dismissed some of this stuff too until I
Mhm.
understood it better.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right, and I think my biggest thing with compassionate inquiry is right, I think the mainstream conversation around compassion and even self-compassion is, like, what you're saying around, like, what we want. And true self-compassion and true compassion is not about what we want, but it's often about what we need, providing what wasn't given and what we need, right? And through the lens of what truly is good for us. So one of my favorite one of my favorite terms is disciplined compassion, right? And that's where a caregiver excuse me, a caregiver would come in, right? If you're little and you have a messy room, a caregiver wouldn't say like, "Ugh, whenever you're ready to clean your room, take your time," right? It would be like, we have to clean our space because that creates an organization in your brain and it's good for our bodies and we can have a safe, clean space and it's teaching you a skill as an adult. So we're going to do the hard thing and you can be upset and you can feel sad and it's unfair, all the things, and we'll hear that, but the boundary is the boundary, right? That
Mhm.
sense of compassion and discipline. And that's where it's like, no, we don't get permission not to go do the thing just because it's hard. Like, if
Right.
we want to really enact change in our body and our brain, then we have to do the hard thing. And it can be
Right.
hard, but we still do the thing. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're speaking to, but that's, like, often what I'll try to correct in people of like, "Well, you're not being nice." Well, it's not about maybe being nice, but it's about, like, me attuning to what I'm seeing in you and what I see you need and, helping you get to where you want and need to be within
Yeah.
yourself. Like
I mean, I think that what you're speaking to is a little bit of a nuance of it, is that this comes up often with patients one on one, is that I do a lot of lifestyle change and people will feel bad that they couldn't make a change or that they slipped up, quote unquote. And,
yeah,
you know, and I tell them it's a slippery world. It's not you, it's hard to make
mhm,
change. And it's actually not helpful. People think it is to self deprecate or keep themselves, quote unquote, accountable,
mhm,
and that I won't do better if I don't tell myself you should have done better.
yes,
And I have to remind them that there's no definition of accountability that includes shame. And actually, when we're in a shame cycle, what we're doing to ourselves is putting ourselves in fight or flight mode, that then
mhm,
our body thinks we're in survival and it can't make change because it doesn't have the resources to make change. It only has the resources to try to survive this threat. And
mhm.
so we may think we're doing ourselves good by telling ourselves, you know, we're bad, but actually, the more compassionate you can be with yourself, the better you'll be at change. It's hard for people to click into at first.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right, and even in right, even when we introduce this thing of compassion or change or joy, it is this, like, yeah, bad, good, black, white, success, failure, and then when we don't do the thing, it's like, "I'm a failure, I can never do it," and it's
Right.
so I'm so glad to hear that that messaging is like, "It's not you, the world is slippery," like, recorrect correcting that narrative and reorienting that person to what is truly them and within their control versus maybe that really rigid neural pathway that's always been there. Uh,
Right.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. How have you seen this maybe, and maybe there's not, but I'm also trained in MDMA assisted therapy. So this is through my own
Mhm.
lens, my own experience. So take what you will, what you won't. But I'm curious about the collision that you have seen between your world and this in psychedelic medicine and joy. Like
Mm.
how do those have cohesion?
Oh, I think it's really big. Joy is, like we said, like we talked about, an internal embodied resource. And so when we talk about psychedelics, what we're really talking about is, connecting more into an embodied experience
Mhm,
and really getting out of the strictly cognitive, rational Western mode of solving or thinking.
mhm,
And so when we are working with psychedelics, there's so much room to connect to joy as an internal resource in a different way. You know, um, in many ways. I mean, first of all, as you know, when people are using psychedelic medicine in therapeutic ways, we're really able to understand that they help us see the unseen, the narrative that isn't available or accessible to us every day from whatever blocks we have around that emotional trauma, cognitive, societal, cultural, whatever it may be. We see a different story and we start to see that we can live that story differently. So
mhm,
joy becomes more accessible to us.
mhm,
We also are able to understand that there are ways that we can connect to the power and the resilience of our ancestry, whether that be our immediate parents and lineage or even centuries before. We
mhm,
are very primed to look at the negative. So as we're feeling, suffering ourselves, we can start to take on the suffering of our communities and our families, in a
mhm,
way that it becomes a story that it's unsolvable, that this is just the way it is. And yet we tend to never be able to see the power and the resilience our
mhm,
ancestry and our lineages and our families have, and that we have, because how could we have come to this point already if we didn't have that kind of power? And so there are all these ways that I think psychedelic medicine helps the patient see stories and live and feel stories in a different way that allows joy to be more accessible.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I was just having a conversation with another human, and right, we were talking about the difference between ancestors being behind you versus ancestry and ancestors being in front of you, right? Where you're walking the path that they have created for you. And you have the support of them behind you. And so, um, with all of the intergenerational trauma, there's also this idea of intergenerational joy, right? And that is an embodied experience. And so, absolutely supporting that deeper embodied connection to all of that story, all of that history. So important when we look
Yeah. And I
at.
mean, I think that it's just kind of silly if you break it down that we think that even our communities who have suffered so much in such visible ways, that how could they have survived if they had not had hope as well, or glimmers of a better life, or an
Mhm,
understanding, even if they could not believe or see that their life was going to be better, they had hope for their children and those who came after them. There are ways that their power and their hope lives in our DNA. And it is that people, lose sight of because we're so primed to see the hardship and the negative. And I think that's very important. But when we don't widen our lens to see everything, then all we see is the negative, and
mhm.
we don't see what has been buoying us also.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I was just talking to one of my aunties, and she was saying, like, recognizing like I am a cycle breaker, and although I didn't get it perfect, I gave my children the strength to get it done and to break those cycles permanently. So even that acknowledgement of
Yeah.
it it isn't just going to happen in one generation, or it isn't just going to happen in one individual, but we can set a different foundation. And when we're talking about building in joy and access to joy and finding those glimmers and belonging and safety, like that is the work you are doing within yourself, and not only for you, but those to come. Which is why I think it's healing is important. And
Yeah.
yeah, we just become a healthier society as a whole, or a healthier community, when we really can be in our own experience and our own story. It allows a deeper connection, deeper conversation, a deeper sense of being held and holding. Yeah.
I love that she said that. That's really powerful, that
Yeah.
I held the strength so that they could break the cycle. That's really, really poignant.
Yeah. 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 It kind of shook me. I was like, whoa, who's been going to therapy? Like so yeah, but it definitely just, yeah, supports that idea of like, and remembrance of, oh, this is why I'm doing it, right? Because like you said, so often it is easy to be in the trauma, or to look at the trauma, or to look at the healing. And I think even that shift in society of like, we don't constantly have to be striving. We can actually settle and find contentment in where we are, who we are in the moment. That practice of gratitude for what is happening right now, um, is helpful, very, very
Mhm.
helpful and supportive.
Yeah, and even just, people will say, "Well, I just don't have anything to be thankful for." And I say, "Yeah, you don't have to, actually." There are
Mm,
some days where I'm crying and I think, "I'm grateful that I'm crying because that means I still have my humanity. That
mm,
means I haven't lost yet." You know, it's not I'm grateful of this pain or always, or I'm grateful for the growth or the lessons or whatever. It's also just being grateful that I'm here on this earth experiencing all of it,
yeah.
that I'm crying, I'm sad, I'm deeply grieving. That means I'm still here and alive fully. And so, it really comes down to this understanding of seeing more and widening our lens.
Mhm. Yes, I agree 100%. So, where can people find you? Where can they purchase this book? Where can they begin learning more, if this is not already a practice or a ritual or an invitation?
Yeah, I would invite anyone to. I have a website, tanmeetsethi.md.com, which I'm sure you'll list in the notes. And my book is available anywhere books are sold, audio book, anywhere. But you can also go to joyismyjustice.com, and I have links to all the booksellers. And then I'm most active on Instagram and Substack. Substack has become my favorite corner of the internet. And so I do all my writing there now, and I have a community called Joy is My Justice, and I'll give you the link to that. And it's just really beautiful place where I'm starting to really build a collective who is committed to looking at life in a way that allows them to thrive more by holding the hard.
Is that a community that anyone can access?
Yeah,
Is it
yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and actually, 90% of it is free. I mean, I'm really committed to
Awesome.
keeping it free. And
Yeah.
then for people who support the community financially, I have some special offerings for them as well. But it's mostly free. So
Awesome. Okay. So we will
yeah.
send people in all of these directions, and everything is going to be linked. So don't panic. We'll reinforce all of this. So I appreciate your presence. I appreciate your wisdom, and your willingness to step into my community. So
Mm.
thank you. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for inviting me in your community. I never take it lightly. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. So all right. For those who are listening in, thank you for another week of listening. Thank you for another episode. Thank you for doing the work of, really just self reflection and integration with new tools, new resources, new helpers. I appreciate you. So, have a good week.